Welcome to the Steam Road podcast. Today we've got Louise Hollow, one of our commercial property solicitors, and Simon Hunt, director at Hunt Commercial. So I think a good place to start, Louise, would be different types of commercial property.
Basically, in terms of types of commercial properties to consider, it could include, as an example, retail spaces, offices, whether it's industrial units, warehouses. So it could be, for instance, whether it's depending on whether mixed use is required. The types of property would just also depend as well what the business needs would be.
What sort of things do your clients look for when they're trying to choose a?
Yeah, so it's in the old days, pre-COVID, there was a million different uses for planning consent. So an industrial unit had to be an industrial unit. It was either light industrial, warehousing, or heavy industrial. So things that create noise or sound pollution, and therefore couldn't sit next to residential properties. And then Boris and his merry men came along and during COVID and put a bomb under the user class guide and essentially did away with a lot of those sections. And so they introduced something called user class E, which amalgamates many, many different types of uses. So retail, medical, vets, even creches, gymnasiums, cafes, restaurants, warehousing, industrial, all were merged into one. So when you go around an industrial site nowadays, you'll see a dance school, you'll see a gymnasium, you'll see a manufacturer and a warehouse, a trade counter operator, all operating under the same user class guide, which is brilliant because you don't then clog up the planning system with applications which are non-contentious for changes of use when they're all so similar.
Right.
So this way, an industrial property can now be used for 100 different types of uses, essentially. And the same with the high street. In days gone by, it was really tricky to get what you called A3 use, which was like restaurants, cafes, that sort of stuff. And with use class E, you can just change, you can sell handbags one day and then sell pizzas the next and not have to worry about a planning consent. You'll have building regulations if you need extraction, of course, to comply with, and that will possibly need planning consent as well because it's a physical change to the exterior of a building. But otherwise, it's streamlined things. So it was a massive, massive help for the process and simplified matters massively. So that's kind of
Yeah, I really appreciated that. So yeah, going back 10, 15 years, you went into an industrial site and it was all widgets and plumbers merchants and things like that. And now you've got rock climbing and you can have cafes and everything, don't you?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then there's like Chaucer Industrial Estate is a prime example of that. You've got a dance school, you've got a gym, you've got two gyms there actually, and you have got a rock climbing centre as well. All mixed in with other companies, electrical contracting firms and distribution companies, etc. So it's great. It means that the vacancy rates of commercial properties is reduced because they can be used for a zillion different things. So you appeal to a much greater market.
So does your client normally know what they're looking for when they come in to see you? If it's a rock climbing, would you steer them towards the right one, or would they normally come with one in mind? I want to go there.
We get a mix of people, and because we've done this job for so many years now, you build up a lot of experience and you know what works in the right places. For example, if someone's got a business whereby they're up and out the door at 4 a.m, you know they can't have a warehouse next to residential because you'll get the council get complaints and they'll basically shut them down. Equally, at a rock climbing school, you need eaves height, you need decent eaves height, so you need to go to more modern types of buildings where you've got that clear spans. And then equally, if you're just pushing widgets together and so forth, you don't need the eaves height, and therefore you want to save on your heating bills because all the heat goes up. So we do, and it's probably more so with regards to, if you're doing a lot of distribution work, you need to be in areas where there's good road access. If it's a manual intensive kind of company with lots of employees, you need to be where your staff are. So you need to be near good public transport, buses, trains, that sort of thing. And near the chimney pot so that people haven't got far to commute to work, because as much as we love where we live, the road links aren't great. And therefore, if your business moves 10 miles, you might as well move 100 miles because the impact on your workforce, and that workforce deciding to change employer because they've had a 2-hour commute for a 20-mile drive because someone's broken down by the wayside. It's huge. So businesses tend to stay local because of that fact. They're very conscious about keeping their staff on board. So, and that's why you'll find, basically estates in the towns being pretty much 100% full. 99.9% of the time.
What are legal considerations in choosing commercial property?
I mean, in terms of what you were discussing there as well, it's important to check what the current permitted use is. So, for instance, carrying out then, as an example, a local search to check what is the permitted use, and also, say, for instance, in terms of checking basically the title for the property. So, providing a report on title, and it depends as well in terms of how the property, whether it's been purchased or leased. So, as an example, if someone is looking to obtain a commercial lease, then it would be checking the terms of the lease as well. So, for instance, whether there would be a break clause, rent reviews, checking.
So is that when someone else still owns the property and you're just sort of borrowing it for a term or something like that? Is it when you get a lease?
Say, for instance, as an example, if there was someone who wanted to obtain a lease, so if they wanted to be a new tenant at a property, so a landlord would then be granting a lease to that new proposed tenant. And then in terms of the tenant, they would want to, prior to completing on the lease, do a lot of due diligence in terms of checking the title, checking the terms of the lease. As an example, within a lease, it could be what type of covenants are in there. A covenant would be then a promise to do something, or it could be a restrictive covenant, which would be a promise then not to do something. So there would be a lot of things, as well as carrying out searches. So checking, for instance, carrying out an environmental search, local search, water and drainage search. Again, it's just in terms of carrying out that due diligence to make sure that when they go into the property, they're fully aware then of all the terms, and also checking as well all the regulations, whether that's health and safety regulations, fire regulations. So it's just important to make sure that they know completely what they're getting into before entering and completing on a lease.
So is it better to own as a freeholder, or is it better to lease?
Well, it's a bit like it's with commercial properties. It's the same as a residential to an extent that renting is arguably dead money, but with commercial, it's businesses need liquidity. So quite often people will prefer to rent because it's a fixed outgoing for a fixed term, albeit that could be subject to rent reviews periodically every, say, 5 years or so. But of course, if you buy something, it's quite popular for people to buy a commercial building and place it in their pension and then create a lease from their pension to their company. So there's no better landlord-tenant relationship than the same person, essentially, albeit under wearing two different hats. And of course, that's then tax-free going into the rent collected goes into the pension tax-free. Although we're not obviously financial advisors, but that's a very popular way of creating a pension or tax-efficient savings investment opportunity. If you're buying freehold as well, you're looking at putting down roots for the longer term, whereas rentals tend to be for businesses that are perhaps quite dynamic and are growing or changing, evolving on a regular basis. Therefore, they want the flexibility of being able to either sign their lease or sublet it during the middle of the term of their lease, or indeed at the end of the lease, then just move on to the next property, be it another town, or just a larger property generally, because the business has obviously grown in that 5-year period. So it depends really what the business wants out of it. Quite often you'll find people will buy a commercial property as an investment, either to rent out to others or for the business to occupy. But businesses generally don't rely on property to make money for them. It's the business that makes the money. And the property just accommodates the business to allow it to run and function and make that money for the profit line. So consider it carefully. And very different with commercial property compared to residential is that you are as the tenant responsible for the upkeep of that building. So it's not like if you rented a flat and the boiler packed up, you'd phone the landlord, they'd get a plumber around, they'd fix it, they'd pay for it. With commercial, it's the other way around.
Right.
You as the tenant are responsible for that building. So it's important to understand by your solicitor what your responsibilities are. And something called a full repairing lease. There are situations where you have a photographic schedule of condition, which essentially you get a surveyor to take a load of photos of a property, recording its condition, and then that is then attached to the lease as a limitation of repair, shall we say, so that when you hand back the property at the end of the term,
You're
you
able
hand
to
it
put
back
it
in the
back.
same condition as you took it on, recorded by those photos. So that's a really useful thing. And it's a fair way of doing it, because you know the landlord's also protected, because he can say, look, here's the photos. There's no misinterpretation as to how the survey was worded, because the photos say it all. That carpet was new, or that dent in that cladding wasn't there, and therefore you need to replace it. So that's
A bit like when you return a hire car.
exactly, yes,
They
very
always
much
go
so.
around, don't they, and check it.
Indeed, they do. Hold their head in their hands, hoping that they don't spot something. So yeah, so it's something to bear in mind. Of course, if you own the freehold, then arguably you may carry out repairs because you own the building, you want to look after your asset. So that's the sort of things there. And touching just thing earlier, what you was talking about due diligence, etc. Your there was quite a period, and there still continues to be a period, a fashion of local authorities liking mixed use development. So you have housing, and then you have some business space built next to it. And there are one or two schemes out there locally, particularly, whereby you've got these lovely new business units, but the hours of use are restricted because they don't want to be impacting the residents who are literally across the road. So if you're looking at a business that's going to be making noise or working weekends, etc., or late into the evenings, then you want to be making sure that you're checking your hours of use and the days of use that you can work. So, and that's where the solicitor comes in and will find those kind of limitations and go, is this going to impact your business?
Yeah.
So
What are the likely costs buying a commercial?
I mean, there would be multiple considerations. Obviously, if someone is instructing a solicitor, is considering then what the legal fees are going to be. Also considering, as an example, what the rent would be. So, as an example, considering, right, what's the term of the lease, or how much is it payable per annum. There can be also business rates, so considering, as an example, whether there's any service charges, what the contributions are towards insurance. So there are multiple considerations, and again, it's considering what the business needs are as well.
And you usually factor that in then, so you forecast that, do you, actually costs?
So the one thing what we can't forecast is what people's utilities will be, because obviously one business, like a colleague of mine, they always leave their computer on every night, and I'm going around turn them all off. It's like having children, turn the lights off. So so we make it abundantly clear to people: you're going to have your rent, you're going to have your business rates, you can have your insurance, and then you're going to have your maintenance as well. Certain, like with lots of flats, certain service charges will also have a sinking fund, so that it's designed so that you pay your yearly service charge maintenance, normally in two stages, normally half yearly or sometimes quarterly. But then every 20, 30 years, there may be a major item of expenditure for the estate, be it resurfacing the roads or replacing the roofs on the buildings. And what you don't want as a tenant is to suddenly go, we've got £2,000 here, then suddenly it's 50,000. How can any business budget for that? So what they do is having a sinking fund is you've got your 2,000, but then another 1,000 goes into the sinking fund, so that in 30 years' time the money's there, and therefore everybody's service charge remains at a sensible level. So so that's kind of things there. But that's pretty much it. So obviously, as an employer, you've got public liabilities, employers' insurance, and contents insurance. And it's important to note also, again with commercial, the landlord will insure the building, but you as the tenant will reimburse the landlord the insurance premium. And if you're in a multiple occupied building, then that will be via the service charge, normally via a managing agent as well.
And how big is this of ESG and things like that coming along? Big environmental reports, and it seems to be a thing of focus now.
Well, yes, environmental, certainly in terms of planning for new developments coming in, you'll see a lot more business parks being built with maybe heat pumps or solar as
Yeah.
part of it as well. Energy performance certificates are a biggie, that the governments have consistently targeted businesses to pave the way for more energy efficiency. Um, and so you'll see that energy performance ratings at the moment, currently, if you have a rating of less than E, then you can't actually let your building. You can't sell it. You can't let it. You can't do anything with it. So
that takes a lot of investment then, does it, to get it up to?
yes, indeed. And
Yeah.
quite often it's simple things like old fluorescent light tubes.
Right.
You know, once upon a time were very popular, but nowadays it's all about LED lighting. So actually, if you replace your lighting systems to over to LED, then that will often bring up your rating. Gases seems to be a public enemy number one in terms of commercial. So if you've got gas boilers, gas heaters, the energy assessors will be scoring that low. So again, going over to more heat pump source heatings and so forth will help that. Double glazing, etc. All add to the improving of the energy efficiency rating. So yeah, something
that's a cost the freeholder has to pick up, is it, rather than the leaseholder?
Well, that depends on negotiations between the parties. There's no immediate default. If the property is empty, then yes, the landlord has to get that building into a rating level sufficient to be able to then let it, because you can't put it on the market without it.
But if you've got someone in mid-term, that is perhaps something you could.
I would argue that was the tenant's responsibility to fulfil their obligations. Although, as a lawyer,
that would come down to the lease, would it? What was in there?
I mean, say for instance, if someone is, if a landlord is granting a lease, then the landlord should be providing an EPC at the relevant rating. Whilst then they're in the property, then it would be then the tenant's responsibility, say for instance, should they then be, as an example, assigning a lease.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. It is certainly something that we're experiencing with the bigger firms who've got surveyors acting for them. They're going, okay, we want a clause in the lease that says in the future, if rating gets much more restrictive in terms of or the compliance gets stricter, they're kind of going, actually, we want the landlord to do this. And the same with COVID. That was no one even heard of COVID before. Of course, leases had no provisions for such matters, and so it was a bit of a horse deal between landlord and tenants about rent holidays or rent reductions or changing the frequency of rent payments from quarterly to monthly to help cash flow, that sort of stuff. And now we're finding more often, particularly with the bigger outfits out there, they are looking to engage some sort of clause in there that pre-agrees a specific reduction over a period of time, depending on how long they're forced to close for. Hopefully we'll never have another one, but I suspect we'll have something along the line.
And then just to finish off then, looking ahead, is there anything people should be wary of?
I think it's my best advice I can give is A, get legal advice, and B, when you're talking terms with an agent, get a second opinion, get another agent's opinion on the matter, because obviously as the agent, you're there to get the best deal for the landlord, and that may not necessarily be a true reflection as to where the market is at. So that could be, for example, negotiating a rent-free period at the beginning of the lease, or a stepped rent, and prefixing that increase until you get to the asking rent.
Quite often new businesses, so they need that cash flow that helps with.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it's one of those cases of pay little but save a lot. And it's the same with the law. These leases are 50 pages long. And they've evolved over decades. So they're very pretty much at the pinnacle of where the property law is. And so as a tenant, you don't want to just simply go, oh, I'll just save myself a few £1,000s on legal fees But then 2 years later, suddenly you're stitched up because you've got a full repairing liability on a building that was falling down, and you've got to hand it back in A1 condition. And this is where you guys come in and say, "Look, guys, you've really got to know what you're committing to here, because it is a legally bound contract, and you have to fulfil your obligations. So take professional advice every time."
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank
Okay.
you.